What's up, everyone? This is Raphael again for May 4th, the Cinco de Mayo, or as I like to call it, Cinco de Drinko weekend edition of the MMA Ratings Hangout. We didn't have a show last week. That's my fault. We have a lot to catch up on. Today I'm going solo though, because my partner Roy is out of commission. He's been working a lot lately, so he's probably passed out somewhere across the pond. So send him some good dreams and vibes for some good dreams while he catches up on his deeds for working so hard. But while he's asleep, we're going to talk about the world of combat sports. In general, this is probably one of my favorite times of the year when it comes to sports in general because there's so much going on. There's great NBA playoffs, hockey playoffs are going on, baseball is starting up, and you always have some great combat sports going on right about now. So we have a lot to talk about. We're going to jump right in it and just go over some of the things that we saw from not only this week but last week as well. So I guess I'm going to start with UFC 172, where John Jones successfully defended his title against Glover Teixeira. I was actually kind of surprised that the outcome of the main event was so one-sided. A lot of people thought that that was going to happen. I was kind of under the impression that Glover would have a better game plan coming into the fight, and I thought he would be able to do a little more, get off some better shots, and kind of challenge Jones a little bit better. But he just really didn't have any answers for John Jones' length for the whole fight, and he basically got worked over for the whole 25-minute bout. So again, it looks like John's going to sit up on top of everyone's list as one of the best fighters in the sport. I think he's the top right now. I think he's the number one pound for pound fighter in the world, and he just consistently goes out and shows that. This opens up a opportunity for the rematch with him and Alexander Gustafsson, which everyone figures should have already happened by now. And I am of that ilk. I think that the UFC should have went ahead and made that rematch immediately, but they decided to go their own route, and this is one of the only times where it actually worked out that both the champion and the top contender won their next fight. So now they can go ahead and make this fight sometime later on this year. I think the card as a whole, UFC 172, I thought was pretty good. There were some very good fights from top to bottom. Luke Rockhold, I think. Well, okay, let's back up for a second before I say who kind of impressed me the most. I'm going to go to the Anthony Johnson and Phil Davis fight. And I was going to say Luke Rockhold impressed me the most, but actually I'm going to take a step back and say Anthony Johnson kind of deserves that for this card because he was a big underdog with Phil Davis. No one really thought he was going to be able to come back into the UFC and pick up a win over probably one of the top 10 guys in the weight class, maybe even a little bit higher. Some people have Phil Davis in the top 5. But he shut down everything that Phil wanted to do and just basically kept his win streak going to show that maybe everything he was doing outside of the UFC wasn't a fluke. And, seeing Anthony Johnson get some success has always been a pleasure to me just because of the fact that he was jettisoned from UFC. I always felt like he was done wrong when he was put out just because of his weight issues. They should have definitely pulled him to the side and had some conversations with him because, man, he had the opportunity to be a prominent welterweight. If he could have made middleweight, he would have been a threat there too. And you see that he's going to continue winning at 205. And it's like he carries power at all those weight classes too. And he's even gone all the way up to heavyweight, so where they need some help in a weight class is not really deep at all. So seeing him come back and get this win was definitely interesting to me. I enjoyed watching it happen, and I look forward to some big things from him in the future. I mentioned that maybe he should fight someone like a Fabio Maldonado next. And I mentioned that in our fights to make pieces on MMA Ratings.net right now. And that may look like a step down, but it's not really because Fabio's one of those guys who can really bring the best or the worst out of someone. And we've known that Johnson has had gas tank issues in the past, and Fabio doesn't go away at all. So we'll be able to see if this win was really, a big win for him, and see if he can really make some noise at 205. If he was able to get another win, 1 to 2 more wins, though he might be considered one of the top contenders in the weight class and might be next in line for a title shot in the weight division that John Jones is kind of already clearing out. He has the rematch with Alexander coming up, then probably a fight with Dan Cormier, who's also booked, or excuse me, Dan Cormier, who's also booked right now against Dan Henderson coming up. So Johnson has the opportunity to kind of slide himself in there to be like that third man behind him. So I'm looking forward to some big things from Rumble and hope that he continues on his winning ways. Luke Rockhold is probably the next most spectacular performance of UFC 172 when he stopped Tim Bosch. And I, this is interesting because when Luke came over from Strikeforce, I thought he wasn't going to do as good as he has been. He had that one little hiccup against Vitor, but other than that, he's looked great from start to finish. And to be honest, I was never really high on Tim Bosch as a middleweight contender, and this is just another example of why. So he was just totally outclassed from start to finish. So I think the UFC has a good opportunity to make Luke into a star for them. He has those great looks. He has that California personality that a lot of people may like, and he has a fighting style that he can finish guys on their feet, he can finish them on the ground as well. So he's got everything that they want and that they consistently promote. So I look for some big things from him. Had he not lost that fight to Vitor, he'd probably be the next man in line. But instead, he has to wait behind what seems like Jacare should be the next guy to get the shot after Machida if Belfort doesn't. And he's already got a win over Jacare from back in their Strikeforce days. So Luke's kind of going to be sitting around. I expect him to have to maybe fight one more time before he can get a title shot. I mentioned him fighting against Yoel Romero maybe sometime later on this year to see if he can get one more win before getting a title shot. I think that's a great fight for him. Not that it'll be easy. I think it'll be very tough because he'll have to deal with some standout wrestling from Yoel, and Romero doesn't shy away from exchanges on the feet as well, which plays kind of into Rocco's game. So that's something else to look forward to. Again, he looked great at UFC 172, and I think he's probably like the number two guy behind Vitor, or behind both Vitor and Machida, depending on the way UFC handles their business. But no one really knows how they decide to give who title shots. But again, Luke Rocco probably had the second most impressive performance of the night after Anthony Johnson, in my opinion. Then that brings us up to Jim Miller. Jim Miller is one of those guys who is going to stick around for a very, very long time. He went on that impressive run at 155, but then he ran into Vincent Henderson, and then he has issues with the Nate Diaz loss and then the Pat Healy loss that was overturned. But Miller is always going to be somebody that's going to deserve to be in the top 10, in my opinion, just because he'll beat a lot of the younger guys that are coming up, and then he only loses consistently to. I'm not even going to say consistently, but he only loses to the top guys in the weight class. Like if you look at his resume, he's only lost to Frankie Edgar, Gray Maynard, Nate Diaz, and we'll include the Pat Healy loss in that too as well. So he's always been someone that deserves to be in big fights. And I also mentioned, I think his next fight should be against Donald Cerrone. Cerrone, excuse me. I always feel like that name wrong. But his next fight should be against Donald Cerrone, and that fight actually has been made for later on this year. So that's something I'm looking forward to. I think Cerrone will have the advantage in that fight just because he's a better striker on his feet, and I think he has this the grappling ability to kind of stave off Miller's ability to maintain position if the fight hits the ground. So that's something that I'm definitely looking forward to. I think it'll look like the Miller-Lozon fight from last year, but instead of Miller being the one dealing out the damage like he did to Joe, I think this time he'll be the one taking it. So I'm definitely looking forward to that fight later on this year. There were some other good performances as well. It's always good to see Joseph Benavidez get another win. I feel sorry for him because he's not going to get another title shot anytime soon, but he's going to be able to beat just about everybody at flyweight and even a lot of guys at bantamweight as well too. So as he sits around and waits, maybe I don't know. I probably doubt he's considering a move back up to 135 to see what he can do there. But he's just going to be one of those guys that gets. Even John, I can't even really compare him to John Fitch when Fitch lost to GSP and then kept winning all those fights and never got a rematch because Joseph finishes people. It's like if he's not losing to Demetrius Johnson, he's getting a win, and he's getting a win in a way that the fight doesn't go 15 minutes. So I'm not really sure what's next for him. I think he'll be waiting around for a little while before he gets another big fight, and he'll probably be on these prelim main event sort fights for a little while until we see something different. Then we have Takanori Gomi. He's probably one of the last few standouts from the Pride days that are still competing and like still winning consistently. And he looked very good against Isaac Valley Flag in their lightweight fight. I'm not sure how long the Fireball Kid is going to be around anymore, but he seeing him getting a win is very good. The UFC is supposed to go to Japan sometime later on this year, so they're going to have him on that card because everyone's going to love seeing him over there. And I'm just excited that he's still winning, that he's still looking good, even with his reckless style that he goes into these fights with. So I'm a fan of Takanori Gomi. It's good to see him get the win, and it'll be interesting to see what's next. Probably one of the biggest stories coming out of UFC 172 is the Beth Correa story. She beat Jessamine Duke on last Saturday and looked into the camera and held up four fingers and then took one of them down, which has brought on the ire, I guess is the word, of Ronda Rousey. Now, for those of you who may not know, Rousey is part of this so-called female Four Horsemen, I guess, group with I can't remember who the third fighter is, but it's her, Shayna Baszler, Jessamine Duke, and one other fighter as well who is a part of this group. It started off kind of as a joke, but Correa, who's undefeated, actually kind of upped the ante when she defeated Duke and then made that motion into the camera. And now Rousey's kind of calling her out, which is the way you want to go. If you have the champion calling you out at this point in time, especially in a division that needs contenders, then nothing can really stop the UFC from making that fight. Rousey has her commitments coming up for these two movies that she's going to be in. But if Bethany Baby get one more win over the summer or like early fall, then that may be a fight that they can make to close out the year or to start 2015 if Rousey doesn't fight at any point this year. Her two biggest, I use it in quotes right now, challenges in Holly Holm and Chris Cyborg aren't even on the roster right now. So, and Kat Zingano is still injured, and there's no telling when she'll come back, but she probably wants to take one fight before challenging Rousey as well. So really, even putting Zingano against Correa maybe later on this year might be a way to kind of introduce her into the title contention spot. But that's probably like one of the biggest stories coming out of this past weekend, because Rousey went out of her way to call her out, and Beth did the right thing, because even Ronda's commending her on the way she went about doing it and calling her out like that. So supposedly she may be fighting Baszler next, but if she was to get that win, that's just another way for her to kind of come after the champ, which is exactly what you're supposed to do in a sport such as this. And this is the last thing I want to touch on looking at this card is Danny Castillo. Danny's always been funny to me because he's that Team Alpha Male guy that everyone forgets about, but he consistently wins fights. Like, he doesn't lose too many times that he's in the octagon. If you look at the whole group of Alpha Male guys, he may actually have he may have the most wins that the group has had since they've been brought over from the WEC. He put out Charlie Brenneman with just 21 seconds into the second round. So if he was to get together another run, he could possibly kind of crack the top 15 of the weight class, maybe top 10. He tends to lose to the upper echelon of the group, even though I think he deserves a draw against Edson Barbosa for their fight earlier this year, which was great to see. I really you wonder what his ceiling may be as a part of that Team Alpha Male group, but still, he deserves every little bit of respect. And, he's on the second fight of the card. I think he's much better than that planning wise, but still, he's going to be one of those guys that sticks around as well. So that's kind of what stood out to me this past, or excuse me, it was the weekend before last with UFC 172. I thought it was a very good card. The UFC got what they needed out of it. John Jones didn't come out. Man, it's weird. He didn't even come out looking like a superstar, even though he dominated Teixeira. A lot of people were criticizing him for the eye poke. I guess like the way he likes to post out with his close hand. He likes his jab hand basically. He likes to post out and test range, and he's been doing it for a while now. And I guess a lot of people were upset with the way he was doing that. So he's garnered some criticism for that, which the MMA media, not media, excuse me, but the MMA public tends to come down on him for everything that he does. So that it is what it is with John Jones. So either way, he still got the win. He's still set up, which should be the UFC's biggest fight this year. That I don't think they really have anything else to offer, big mega fight wise. They have their champions there, and they have some good fights to offer. But this is probably like the one that will get like the most coverage, unless there's something else changes down the line. But this right now, as of May 4th, this is probably like the biggest fight that they have to offer at this point in the year. So looking outside of the UFC, we're going to now move on to the Bellator 118 card that was held this past Friday. There's a couple of things to point out from that event. The original main event was supposed to be Joe Warren and Eduardo Dantas for the Bellator bantamweight title, but Dantas was injured, so and I think he's going to be out for 6 months. That's what I'm hearing. And instead of having Warren wait for that title shot, they decided to make an interim title spot with Raphael Silva, who didn't get a full camp for this fight, but I mean he still had some good points. He was definitely gassed at towards the end of the bout, but I mean he still looked good. He brought up some questions. What of some people watching, like what if he actually did have the opportunity of training for a full 6 to 8 week camp the way some professional fighters do? Maybe the outcome would have been a little different, but Joe Warren still got the decision, and he becomes the first man to hold two titles in Bellator in different weight classes. Even though this one carries the interim title, he's going to face Dantas immediately next. So, some people are questioning why even make the interim belt, why put themselves in that situation. I guess some people point out that the Bellator has been such a fan of Joe Warren that they definitely wanted to get a title on him to kind of use him in that promotional aspect, and he does have a lot of value there. So it'll be it'll be a couple months before we see him in action again when he faces off with Dantas. I think that's going to be a great fight. I'm picking Dantas early though because I believe that he's just better all around than Warren, especially on the feet, where I think he'll be able to just pick Joe Warren apart from distance. But and he also has the ground game. He has that team Nova Uniao aspect behind them where they all have some great defensive wrestling, and it's very difficult to take them down. I think he does have that in his back pocket, and I think that will hamper Warren's ability to take him down. And when the fight does hit the ground, he has the grappling ability to kind of be able to stay on top and even submit if necessary. So, but I think it'll be highly contested on the feet more often than not, and I give him the edge in that spot as well. There were some other good points from Bellator 118 as well too. The show had two very highlight reel type knockouts with Andrei Koreshkov and Liam McGeary as they both stopped their opponents in the first round. Andre hit a beautiful flying knee at 141 in the first to put out Justin Baseman, and Liam only needed 22 seconds to put out his opponent. But those are definitely the type of finishes that Bellator likes to see because they want to make sure that they're making that highlight reel, making those highlight reel moments that mainstream fans like to see. I feel like Bellator does go out of their way to cater to that group a little bit more effectively. So that's something worth watching going forward. Marcos Galval got back on the winning track as well as he defeated Thomas Vasquez, and former UFC competitor. He was on the Ultimate Fighter, I think the season with Quentin Rampage and Forrest Griffin. Dante Rivera got another win as he decision his opponent. I can't even try to say that guy's name, but he got a decision win as well. There's some other good points as from those who are 118, but those are kind of the moments that stood out to me just watching late Friday night. So going forward from there, we're not going to spend too much time on that card until we see what comes out next. Bellator does have their pay-per-view coming up later on this month, so that's going to be something worth watching as well. So looking forward to that. I'm definitely can't wait to see Michael Chandler and Eddie Alvarez go at it for the third time. I think that's a fight that the whole MMA community will be looking forward to seeing because they consistently put on very good fights the first two times. And this being Bellator's first time showing up on pay-per-view, I think it'll be a good opportunity as well for them to just continue working in the direction that they're going. Do I think I wouldn't pay for it? I wouldn't pay for it myself because I don't think it's one of those cards that's going to garner a whole lot of attention. But I still think that fight is very good. This is not something I wouldn't miss just because those two guys always put on a great show whenever they're up against one another. So they have that. They have the Quentin Rampage Jackson and King Mo light heavyweight tournament final as well on that card. So that's something else worth seeing. I think Quentin Rampage is going to take that bout. I just think I've never been a fan of King Mo. I don't think that. Excuse me. I've never been a great fan of King Mo, and with the injuries and staph infection that really affected his fighting career. I still think he's going to be. I'm going to call him the Penny Hardaway of MMA right now. Somebody that could have been really good, someone who really could have improved across the board, but he just had to deal with too many injuries that kind of stopped his career. And don't get me started on the way he's fallen in love with being a striker. Now it's kind of completely thrown away his wrestling when need be, but let's not even get started with that. But yeah, definitely he hasn't become the fighter that he should have been, but it's not really his fault. Sorry for the dead air time. I was just trying to play around with my computer. It seemed like it froze on me for a second. But let's see what's coming up next in the world of MMA. This weekend we have the UFC Fight Night with Matt Brown and Eric Silva as the headliner. And the moment this fight was made, everyone got excited because they know that this is one of those fights where someone's going to get knocked out, and it's probably going to happen in the first round. Silva, I'm not going to lie, ever since he was placed against John Fitch, I've been very worried about his career. I feel like the UFC pushed him a little bit too hard. They had the opportunity of building a fighter at welterweight who could have been really fun to watch, and he still is. But they kind of messed up with giving him that fight, and now he's lost that bout, and he also lost to Dong Kim. So it's like, man, what's next for this guy? And it seems like when they put him against the guys he should win against, he does, and he knocks them out in highlight reel fashion. But once they put him against guys who are towards the top 10 of the weight class, he stumbles. And even though Matt Brown was one of those guys who went on like a horrible skid at one point in time in his UFC career, he's really turned it around. People joke calling him the UFC TV champion, but when he is put in the opportunity to perform on UFC TV, man, he consistently does it and he blows the doors off of guys. I expect him to finish Eric Silva. I expect him to do it in the first round, just because he fights with a lot of pressure and Silva fights right into that. So I can see one of these two guys just standing in the middle of the cage and just basically exchanging from start to finish until one of them goes out. And I think that guy will be Eric Silva. So I'm looking forward to that fight just for the screaming and yelling I'll probably be doing at the TV for at least 2 or 3 minutes before somebody gets knocked out. Then you have Lorenz Larkin and Costas Philippou in the co-main event, and I think this is a chance for Lorenz Larkin to really shine. Costas was on a good streak in the UFC before he ran into Luke Rockhold, and Rockhold put him away with that body kick. But I think Larkin is someone who he's another one of those Strike Force guys who looks really good in this weight class. Other than that hiccup to Francis Carmel, he had that issue, and that's a fight that most people thought he won. So this is an opportunity for Lorenz to kind of break through. If he gets a win here, you can expect him to kind of get pushed up higher in the weight class and start getting some bigger fights. At 185, it's kind of wide open. It's probably one of the more interesting weight classes to watch right now with Chris Weidman being on top and so many contenders just rushing to get a shot at him. So this is Lorenz Larkin's opportunity to kind of say, hey, don't forget about me, and help him get bumped up a little bit higher in the rankings. I think he gets a win here, and he'll be able to break into the top 10, the top 15 of this weight class coming on May 10th. There are some other good fights as well. You have Eric Koch and Derek Cruikshank. That's another fight where I think is not going to go the distance. Both of these guys look to finish, and they like to do it in highlight reel style. I'm going to take Koch in that fight as well, though. I think he'll be able to Cruikshank, and it's not. I want to take Koch not based solely on what Koch does as a great fighter. He is good though. I'm going to put it more on Cruikshank and what he doesn't do sometimes in the cage. So sometimes he just doesn't look like he's ready to get his shots off. When he gets a highlight reel head kick, he looks great. But in other fights, he just hasn't looked like he's ready to kind of pull the trigger so often. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. Neil Magny looked great earlier this year, and he's also fighting against Tim Means, and I'm looking to see if he's continues to improve. I think at lightweight, I think he'll be someone worth watching. They're both some big guys, so it'll be a pretty good fight there. But I'm looking forward to seeing if that performance earlier this year is a trend and if it will continue. Soa Paleli is a guy the UFC brought in with the intention of getting some highlight reel knockouts at heavyweight, and he's put in against 8-1 Ruben Pot. So I'm thinking that they hope this is going to be the MMA version of a squash match, which is always good to have on a card. It gets people up screaming, yelling. I think this is going to be the main card opener, so it might be worth at least some laughs, if anything else. Soa has had some tough battles in the UFC so far, so watching him at heavyweight might be pretty enjoyable, but not for the reasons that the UFC hopes at this point in time. But that'll be definitely a heavyweight fight that I look forward to seeing. One fight on the card that I'm looking forward to watching. Actually, there's a couple, but I'm gonna get to those in a second. Ed Herman and Raphael Natal. I suspect this to be more of a grappling match. Herman is a jiu-jitsu and a jiu-jitsu black belt as well as Natal, and they both have really good striking. Natal's been able to put out a lot of the last couple guys he faced before he ran into Ted Kennedy. And Herman's his striking's actually improved a lot since he's been in the UFC, which has been quite for a while. But I hope that this fight hits the ground because I would love to see who is the better jiu-jitsu player at this point in time. I think my gut is leaning towards Natal, but Herman has looked very good on the ground. When he doesn't run into like a Jacare who's just light years ahead of most. So I'm definitely looking forward to that fight as well. It kind of snuck onto the card there, but it's something worth watching. Daryl Montague is also performing. He's one of those guys who was highly touted outside of UFC, and then he ran into John Dodson, and that just got stopped by his momentum. So he's also fighting as well. Eddie Wineland is on the preliminaries. It's kind of tough. He went from getting a title shot against Henry Burrell to being dropped all the way down there. Nick Lentz as well. He's somebody that was kind of pushed up high. Him and Manny Gambarian are fighting towards the opening side of the fight, and I think that'll be another good bout to watch. So this weekend, we have some fun action coming in the form of UFC Fight Night. It'll be live from Cincinnati. I'm looking forward to that card as well. So you can keep an eye on MMARatings.net for some preview pieces that'll probably be coming out from myself and some of the other writers that are consistently on this site. So what we're gonna talk about next. We're gonna just some other things going on in the world of combat sports. Last night we got to see Floyd Mayweather kind of defend his fight as one of the top fighters in the world. I think he's one of the top fighters in the world. Definitely the top boxer right now. When he fought Maidana in what was a fight that was a lot closer than I think most people had. At one point in time, the unofficial scorecards that people that the judges, or excuse me, not the judges, the unofficial scorecards at the time had um, two draws, and actually Maidana up on one card. I think that was going into the sixth or seventh round, I believe. And he really pressured Floyd around the ring, and it wasn't that he was landing a whole lot of big shots, but he was just kind of bullying Floyd from start to finish. He was landing that overhand right that was kind of landing towards towards the back of Floyd's head, hitting him hard in the shoulders. But that kind of let people know that he was there. He wasn't there to kind of play Floyd's game. And he was landing a lot of stiff jabs and crosses too as well, which I want to say he was landing them because he was kind of using so much pressure, not because he was outpacing Floyd in any way, but he was definitely in control of a good portion of this fight. And the judges had it, the scorecards 114 for a draw. We also had a 117-111 card, which I think was completely incorrect, and a 116-112 card, which was closer to what I had. I believe I had 115-113, but this was definitely a good fight. I'm not sure if it says something bad about Mayweather. I think he's like 37, 38 years old, and obviously fighters are going to slow down at some point, as all professional athletes do. He is still, I believe, one of the best that we've seen all time. He's definitely one of the best of this generation, regardless of what you may say about him ducking other fighters. I think he's still one of the best, and he goes out there and he controls bouts from start to finish. He's 46-0. He's doing what he's supposed to do. So, I think he made like $32 million on this fight. Well, excuse me, his purse was $32 million. There's no telling what the pay-per-view buys will be at this point in time. So he's definitely a brilliant businessman when it comes to sports business. But I've always been a fan of his. People can talk about the domestic abuse charges. I was very good. People can talk about the way he is very boisterous with everything he has, and I understand that. I understand the disdain for those aspects of his life. But I'm not one to judge athletes on what they do off of the court. Most of the time, or out of the field of play. Most of the time, I just look at what they do whenever they're performing, because that's how we should look at them. But he's definitely someone who should, especially when it comes to mixed martial arts, he's definitely someone who should be studied, because he's built himself up in a way that he's become a star bigger than the promotion, or bigger than whatever organization is trying to promote his fights, which is somewhere that MMA athletes are struggling. The UFC is doing a very good job of keeping their brand bigger than in any fighter. I think GSP is kind of the closest one to kind of breaking that mold, but he is still even ways off from what Mayweather is doing. I definitely think he's someone worth studying. And I think, unfortunately, people want to see him lose, and he's kind of built that into what's made him so rich at this point in time. So we'll see what comes next for money. And I think he kind of has. I honestly think he has one more year of active competition under him before we see him walk away from the sport. He said he wanted to retire 50-0 or 51-0 to kind of break Rocky Marciano's record. Do I think it'll happen? Maybe not, because he'll probably have to. If he did do that, I think he would run into someone who's just younger and just ready to outgun him. But you never know. This is sports, and crazier things have happened. So that fight was really good. The whole card itself was good as well. So, Amir Khan looked stellar against Luis Colazo. He definitely outpaced him back, like from start to finish, knocking him down. I think he dropped him twice, but he was very dominant. He was one of the guys who people wanted to see fight against uh, Floyd Mayweather in this fight, but that crowd didn't happen. So maybe we'll get that fight sometime later on this year if they don't make an immediate rematch with Marcos Maidana. And Adrian Broner also got back in the winning side, but because he was recently pummeled by Donna earlier this year, and he got he got back into the win in the win column this year when he beat Carlos Molina. So there's some other bits of combat sports news to look forward to. Probably the biggest thing that came out this past year, or excuse me, this past week, was the interesting part that the UFC has re-signed Andre Arlovsky, and Andre was that guy who fought against Tim Sylvia. They kept going back and forth for the title years ago before the UFC has gotten as big as they are now. And then he kind of was a journeyman who kept getting knocked out. He was getting stopped by a lot of guys just because his chin has kind of failed him over the years. And it's interesting that the UFC has signed him back. I would love to see how much money he's making when he does finally compete back on in the octagon because he has to be worth more than most heavyweights. But at the same time, the UFC are cutting guys like Jake Shields and John Fitch just because they're making a little bit too much money than what their skill sets are asking. How can they validate signing back Arlovsky, who's probably going to get knocked out by most heavyweights in the UFC right now? He has a win over Roy Nelson, but I think if they were to fight again now, Roy Nelson probably going to put him to sleep. So I want to know how they can kind of justify this hiring or this re-signing. So I mean, the heavyweight division is definitely weak from top to bottom. So it'll be interesting to see who they pair him up against and when they do finally get him into the cage and just what he does. If he was to go on a run right now, man, I would be so amazed at that. But I doubt that to happen because I just don't see him being able to fight some of the man. I like just off the top of my head, I think Barnett, Travis Brown, Fabricio Werdum, Cain Velasquez, Junior Dos Santos, Stephen Struve, who else? Like those guys alone already beat Andre Arlovsky. Like those six names I just brought up. So maybe even a Matt Mitrione or Brandon Schaub, I would pick them over Arlovsky. So it's really like those are eight guys I've already named that I think will be able to beat the former UFC champion. And on top of that, why didn't they sign back Tim Sylvia? Then if that's the case, because Sylvia's actually, I believe, put together more wins outside of the UFC since Andre has, and when they were both released. So, and Sylvia's been campaigning big time to try to get back into the promotion. At one point in time, he was trying to fight Dan Cormier, wasn't he? Cormier in Strikeforce, but that fight kind of fell apart. So, what's their answer for not signing him back? But they're going to do what they want to do based off of their own expectations. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't expect to see him last longer than 2015. I expect him to come in, get 3 losses, get 2 losses, and be gone again. That's just his current skill set based on what's available in the heavyweight division, which isn't very deep at all. And so just looking at some other news, across combat sports there was also a Glory kickboxing event last night, and probably the biggest news was that Pat Barry got knocked out in the first round by Zach Mikaska, maybe. Is that I can't really say this guy's last name either, but he was definitely stopped in a fight that I believe a lot of people hoped he would have won to maybe set up another fight with Mirko Krokop, or just kind of to get his name going in that promotion. But he was stopped pretty convincingly in the first round with that knockout. So not really sure what's coming next for him. But that's probably like some of the biggest news bits going on outside of the UFC. Keep an eye out for Ben Askren. He's going to be performing for 1FC later on this month. Melvin Gillard and Jesus Cavalcante were signed to fight at World Series of Fighting 11. I think that's going to be a great fight. I'm looking forward to that. If Melvin comes out and fights like Melvin does, I know Jay Z is going to bring the pressure. And this is a fight that if Melvin wins, he could probably be like one more fight away from getting a shot at the World Series of Fighting title. You know, they don't have a deep lightweight division, but they're definitely growing, and that's a fight that he needs to win to kind of remain relevant. You know, right now, I don't even think he is relevant right now, and kind of get back to that spot where he can make some claims for himself. This week, there's a lot. Man, I have a lot of work to catch up on for MMA ratings. Like I have to do a piece on Floyd Mayweather for sure. I was working on something for about John Jones as a business asset for the UFC. So I hope to have that finished today and have that up earlier this week. And I'll probably get a preview piece out in reference of this weekend's fight card. I'm sure that Adam Martin and Rory will have something up and ready to go later on this week. Nathan will probably put something together for the Ultimate Fighter, BJ Penn, Frankie Edgar season, which has been looking pretty good so far. Um, so there's definitely a lot of reasons to go over to MMAratings.net to catch what's going on in the world of combat sports. And you can always come back on Sundays to check us out, as Rory will probably be back next week, and he and I will be sitting here talking about the sport that we all have come to love. So again, this is Raphael Garcia from MMAratings.net, and I hope to have your time next week, and keep your eye on some MMA that should go down from here out. Thank you. Have a great day.